Welcome to Ramin Bahrani. I am so glad that you're here with us.
Great to see you, and thanks for having me, Annette. It's always special for me to see you because some people won't know this, but you were my very first film professor when I was an undergraduate at Columbia University. And I never had classes in filmmaking, but I had classes in film theory and how to think and watch movies. And you were the first person that taught me that. So my understanding of how to make a movie started with you. So I really appreciate it.
All I can say is I am so proud of you. Now, to go back to those days of your undergraduate education at Columbia, you and Aravind Adiga, the author of The White Tiger, met as undergraduates there. In fact, he dedicated his debut novel of 2008 to you. At what point did you commit to directing a film version, and how involved was he in the process of your screenwriting or your shooting or your editing?
Yeah, Arvind and I have been friends since college, since I've known you. In fact, that's when we met in my our freshman year of college in the '90s, and there was a group of us that got to know one another: Afghans, Iranians, Indians, Syrians, Lebanese. We just found one another, and we were interested in each other because he wanted to be a writer and I wanted to be a filmmaker. So we had some natural interests, and I had forgotten this. He mentioned it to me recently that he remembers watching a movie with me. It was Mean Streets, which I don't know if it was a movie that you showed us in our class, maybe.
No.
It's a movie that I always loved. I always thought if I was to be a filmmaker, if I could connect Mean Streets and Where is the Friend's House by Abbas Kiarostami, if I could combine these things, that somehow I would understand what I would do one day. And Arvind says he has a memory that I had gathered him and a few other people to watch this movie, but I kept stopping it and discussing the film in the middle of it, like the shots and the editing and the things that we were learning in the class. And he said it was the first time he had been thinking, wow, movies are something you could discuss like books. And he's a real cinephile. And so we traded manuscripts and screenplays. He's read all my scripts. He's been thanked in almost every film I've ever made, and we talk on the phone usually once or twice a week. We live always in different continents, and um, I remember in 2004 getting the rough drafts of The White Tiger, and immediately thinking, "My God, this is incredible." Especially the main character of Balram. He was so complex and charismatic and sarcastic and hard to pin down and funny and I always thought it would be a good film, but I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do when it was published, when it came out in 2008, for a variety of reasons. But then maybe 4 years ago, Arvin called me and asked me, "What do you think about The White Tiger?" And I said, "I would love to make it, and maybe now is a great time." Um, because at that time, I thought because I always wanted to make it, it had been 15 years I've been waiting to make it, but I thought maybe with companies like Netflix, there was a chance to make a movie like this on this scale because it's a big epic story. It needed a budget, resources that I don't think in 2008 an Iranian guy could walk into Hollywood and say, like, I want to make a movie in India with a bunch of brown people and it's 30% in Hindi. Give me a lot of money to do it. I think they would have told me to get lost. But things changed over time, and it was a good time to do it. Um, Arvin didn't want to read the script. He told me right up front that it would be the only thing I wrote that he wouldn't read. You know, um, he said you have the permission to do whatever you want, make any changes you want, do anything. You know the book, and just do whatever you want that would make it into a movie because he understands they're not the same. And that was great. Although I don't think I changed a lot, you know. And then he really had no involvement in the making. He didn't want to be involved. I told him about the casting a little bit, and then I showed him the movie when it was finished, and thank God he liked it. Um, I think it's the feeling of the book is in the movie, honestly.
And in terms of the casting, I mean, you have an almost entirely South Asian cast. Tell us, how did you find newcomer Adarsh Gourav to
Yeah,
play Balram? And then we'll talk about Priyanka Chopra Jonas.
yeah, Adarsh, man, he's awesome. There was opportunity to work with cast that you would know in the West, Indian diaspora actors that I love, Bollywood stars that I think are tremendously talented. But the more time I spent in India, the more I felt the actor should be from India, born and raised there, live there now, and preferably, if I could, find someone that wasn't already a star. That's what I wanted. I wanted someone that was like the character, trying to rise up, you know. And Adarsh came into the casting session and just blew me away. He smiled and you liked him, and I needed that. But when he didn't smile and he was thinking, I wasn't sure what he was thinking. There was something else going on, which I needed that too. I needed that duality out of him. And he seemed to have that naturally somehow. And he was very good at improvisation. I like going off book in auditions when I like an actor just totally off script, and he was able to do that. And I showed the auditions to Netflix, who knew I could cast movie star in the part, and I give them credit. They said, "My God, that kid's talented. Just get him." And I did. And then he dedicated himself to it. He lived in a village anonymously for a few weeks. He got a job in a tea shop in Delhi for several weeks, getting paid 100 rupees a day for like a 12-hour day. And he put in all the work to get there, you know.
That's serious dedication. I gather he even took jobs, you know, pretending to be a poor person wanting to make a little bit of money so
Oh
that he
yeah,
could, from the inside.
yeah, yeah. Oh, he never gave his ID for the jobs, which was hard because many people wouldn't accept him because he was introducing himself as Balram. And there's a funny story about it because he had been working in this tea shop, and then I texted him. I said, "I need you for a callback with another actor. Could you come to the office?" And he didn't know what to do because he had a job now. And so he told the boss that he had to buy some bananas for the cafe or whatever. And he said, okay. So then Adarsh ran to get the bananas and just kept running and running and running till he got to the production office. And then the next day he couldn't go back to that job because he had just left. So he was looking for a new job, wandering the streets of Delhi. And some men were loading giant pieces of metal into a truck by the side of the road. And they just called him. They said, "Hey, come over here." And he went over there and they said, "You see that metal? Pick it up and put it in this truck." They didn't ask him if he needed a job. Just by looking at him, they assumed he must need a job. And so he did it. And they paid him, you know, a few pennies or whatever. And he came to the office. His hands had been cut up. We got him a doctor, some medicine. And then a few days later, the producer saw him out of the corner of his eye at a shopping mall parking lot with all the drivers smoking beedies as if he was waiting for his master in that mall. So in a way, like when De Niro drove a taxi for Taxi, something like that. He was really getting into it.
Wow. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, Priyanka Chopra Jonas, I mean, she has been a Bollywood star. She won the Miss India and Miss World beauty pageants in 2000 and then starred in the TV show Quantico in 2015. She plays Pinky. And we're going to show you a clip. I'm hoping that everyone tonight has already watched the film and this will be a refresher. But let's take a look at her character Pinky with Balram.
Madam, I'm really sorry, madam. I'll stop.
It's fine. Sit.
I'll stop
Sit.
eating pan, madam.
No, no, that's not what I'm. Just sit down. I think it's wrong the way you work for us. You should be finishing your education, starting your own family.
Ashok sir and you are family to me, madam.
Don't say that. That's not true, Balram.
Really, madam.
No, you can't possibly believe that. Do you know what my parents do in America? They run this shitty little bodega in Jackson Heights, selling beer, pan, and porn. I used to do my homework in the basement. One night I saw my mom being held at gunpoint, and she still finished working the entire night. I got out, Balram. What is it that you want to do?
Well, I saw Priyanka on the Stephen Colbert, and she told him that you do not say action or cut, just whenever you're ready. Now, actors are not used to that. You do that on all your sets, and where does that come from?
Well, yes, because I didn't know any other way. My I don't have formal training, as you know, and I never worked on film sets and I never worked in the film industry. And my first three films were predominantly starring non-professional actors like Man Push Cart, Chop Shop. By the way, which I'm so excited and that are coming out this month on Criterion.
I know.
They've been out of circulation for a long time now. So I never, the whole concept to me was I don't want acting to begin and reality to end. I wanted them to be a little bit more flowing into one another. And when I hear someone say action, I find it so nerve wracking and startling. And when I hear cut, it seems like something is ending that I don't want to end. And I like the idea that there could be some bleeding between the real and the staged somehow. So I don't like to say it. The only time you really say it is an AD. I'll have an AD say it when there's a lot of people that have to move at one time, like in a scene with a lot of extras or something. There's no other way to do it. But in this intimate scene, like you just showed, I don't see any reason to shout action. It seems not needed, you know.
Yeah, it is a much more gentle flow
Yeah.
between so-called reality and so-called artifice. So,
Yes, which I like.
yeah.
Yeah.
When I think last interviewed you, it was at the Telluride Film Festival about your superb film, 99 Homes. You said that your average number of takes was between 5 and 10. Was that also the case with The White Tiger?
Pretty much, I think so. Yeah. I mean, in those early films, without actors, the takes were so much more, and I was often shooting in moving masters, meaning there was no other shot to cut to, so they just had to be right. But I would say about that much. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds pretty reasonable compared to some of the 20 to 30 takes that I've heard about. You also said at the Telluride Film Festival that 99 Homes was about making a deal with the devil that goes back to Faust. And I sense a little of this in The White Tiger as well. Balram's voiceover at the beginning says, "Promise not to judge me until I've told my glorious tale." What draws you to this theme?
Well, I mean, a lot of the characters in the films I make, they're usually underdogs, unseen, unheard voices, people you don't normally put in movies, like servants or people getting evicted from their homes in 99 Homes. And I to me, these are the majority of people in the world, and the struggles are so challenging that you're put into these tough situations where you don't know what the right thing to do is, just to get ahead or just to tread water almost. And it seems hard to judge people for some of the decisions they're making when the alternative seems also so hard. Um, like what Dostoevsky would talk about, give them bread first before we talk about morality, and I feel that from the first films until now, that's like 15, 16 years now, that situation is just getting more pervasive, and maybe it's exiting some of my immigrant characters in the first films and it's starting to become a mainstream, especially now with this horrible COVID, where a lot of people are a paycheck away or one illness away from being homeless or being not knowing how to survive. So you get into these kind of questions about what are you prepared to do just to survive or for your kids to get ahead. And I think there's always something interesting in there.
I remember that one critic referred to your furious humanism, telling the stories of those who are living in the margins, fighting for their share of a good life. Now, The White Tiger depicts Indian society as this giant rooster coop where servants either kill their masters or spend their lives waiting in line for their heads to be chopped off. And I heard Priyanka say in another interview that the majority of the world actually live like Balram, with a future based on how you were born, especially girls who have no choice in their lives. Based on your time in India, how close is the film's fictional take to life for the masses there?
Well, I shouldn't comment too much because I was only there for several months, and it's such a vast country with so many languages, religions, cultures, people that I would be a little foolish to comment on a whole, but I think there's truth in it. But I don't see huge differences elsewhere either. I mean, I think that same emotional feeling is to some degree present here as well. I can understand based on your skin color or your religion or where you're from. By the way, where you're from could be a coal mining town in West Virginia and you could be white. That I can imagine that person's thinking, what am I going to become anyway? What choice do I have or what hope do I have? So there's some truth in it. I think so, yeah.
Well, in fact, when I first watched the film with my husband, Mark, who's a big fan of yours, he suggested that The White Tiger is connected to recent Oscar winners like Parasite and Roma. I mean, they're about servants in a globalized world, ambitious in two cases, focused on class struggle. Balaram asks, do we loathe our masters behind a facade of love, or do we love them behind a facade of loathing? Do you feel connected to Cuarón or Bong in the vision of these films?
Well, that line you said is Aravind Adiga's brilliant line. I mean, the movie is nothing without my friend Aravind. I mean, it's him, it's his vision, it's most of the dialogue, and it's him. This was his brilliant novel. But yeah, I think there's some similarities to Bong in the class struggle. I mean, his which I like that film Parasite a lot. You know, that goes into maybe more stylized horror and even the first half is quite stylized in a way that this, I assume White Tiger feels a touch more real. But I think so. Yeah, there's an anger in that. In fact, I always wondered, did director Bong read Arvind's book? You know, I had always wondered why not, right? Because it was a huge seller. He might have read it. Maybe less with Roma, maybe a little romantic for me. I don't think this servants without health insurance and a union and a retirement plan that get to go to the hospital if your masters are willing to take you there to deliver a dead baby are really going to jump into the ocean to save your kids at the sunset. I don't know if I believe that as much as I believe what you said, loathe and love at the same time. There was not much loathing in that one. So I'm not sure about that. When I get in an, because as I've mentioned before, I think this is a directory, a Rolodex of servants, of ballrooms that can come to this apartment and bring me food or drive me somewhere or put together a table from IKEA. And ballroom could come and do those things in the West. I try my hardest I give them a proper tip. I look at them, I say, thank you. I do those things. And they seem to appreciate that. But I also assume the other part of them wants to, lash out at me. Which is normal. I think if I was them, I would do the same.
I think one of the other great films of 2020 is Nomadland, which covers similar territory to The White Tiger, namely the vast social and economic divisions. Do you see your film as being connected in any way to that of Chloe Zhao?
I haven't seen it yet. I've seen her other films and appreciated them very much. And I've been meaning to see this one. I haven't had a chance yet, but I could be. I'm very eager to see it.
Well, despite the vast difference, I mean, yours is so specific to India and hers is so specific to the contemporary landscape of the United States. But I think both of you as directors have a particular gift for interweaving non-professional actors with professional, for interweaving a kind of stylized element where the cinematography is so rich with a very realistic feel, a canvas that seems like it could have come from a documentary as well. Obviously, what I'm saying is more true about your earlier films than The White Tiger, which strikes me as far more stylized than your previous ones.
Yeah, I think so. I see in Ryder and her first film was Songs of My, I forget the full title. I saw both of those, and yeah, I think that for sure there were similarities in those to my films. White Tiger was more, as you correctly say, more stylized, mainly to match the tone of the novel. during the whole writing of the screenplay with my partners, at Netflix, or McCool, the producer, Azimi, my main partner in Paris on most of my films, it was questions of tone. And same with the department heads in India. It was always like, what is the tone? How do we capture the tone of the novel? That was a constant question. And the novel pops. If you try to read the book, it flies away real quickly because it's propulsive. And there was always an edgy humor to it. And despite its kind of heavy themes, there was something fun about it, especially in the first half. And then the movie, like the book, is broken in half. I don't know, in a way like Kurosawa would do in High and Low, or Kubrick. I think because of Kurosawa, maybe it started breaking some of his films in half, like Full Metal Jacket, or in weird parts. Kurosawa was so inventive in structure.
Especially with Rashomon, which I suspect is a film that you admire too.
I love it, but I find Akira to be so weird, the structure. That is so strange. The structure in Akira is the one that it's always baffling to me. How did he conceive to do that?
Yeah. And forgive me if I invoke a different kind of movie in this context. I think others have noted this too, that Slumdog Millionaire was a huge success in 2008. Do you consider The White Tiger a kind of darker response to that feel-good movie?
Maybe, in a way. I mean, it was interesting because I started reading The White Tiger in 2004, and Arvind was basically done with it by 2006, but it didn't come out until 2008, the same year as Slumdog. So his novel had come out prior, but Slumdog is also based on a book. It's a pretty inventive story, the structure of the novel. And I think Danny Boyle's an awesome director. I remember Shallow Grave from when I was a student. Yeah, I remember seeing that going like, oh my God, you can do that as a first independent movie. And I thought the shooting of Slumdog with Anthony Dodd Mantle was awesome. Who else but Danny Boyle would cast Himesh Patel in Yesterday, right? That was awesome. And yeah, I think in general, the novel and the film White Tiger is of course a little bit darker than Slumdog, which is ultimately more of a fairy tale or a fantasy story, but told in an incredibly vibrant cinema language, That's
right. In fact, A.O. Scott wrote about this. He's been one of your greatest fans, and I admire A.O. Scott a great deal. I actually found a piece of the review where he compares the two movies. He says, it isn't luck, pluck, or happy coincidence that propels Balram from his ragged beginnings to sleek triumph, but cunning, desperation, and a cold-bloodedness that can masquerade as servility. The spirit of Charles Dickens that hovered over Slumdog has been banished. Bahrani's literary reference points and Adiga's lean more towards Dreiser, Dostoevsky, and Native Son, unquote.
Yeah, I know Arvind was really influenced by some of the great Black writers like Ellison and Richard Wright, Native Son and Invisible Man. Dostoevsky is certainly my favorite author and the one that impacted me the most, alongside a few others like the Persian poets that I grew up with, Hafez and Rumi and Ferdowsi, but also Steinbeck. Grapes of Wrath was always very important to me, but Dostoevsky was the one, and Arvind, that I talked about Dostoevsky a lot since college until now. That's about accurate, I think. Yeah.
Now, in terms of influences, I have to ask you this. When Balram's ambition and repressed violence peak, he murders Ashok with a broken glass bottle in an extended scene that actually reminded me of Kieślowski's short film about killing, or otherwise known as Decalogue Number 5. Since I know we share a passion for this director, was that a direct reference for you in terms of that scene, or does Kieślowski enter into your inspiration in other ways?
Yeah, I mean, I love his films. I have your book, for sure. And if you don't have her book, you have to have Annette's book on Kieślowski. Yeah, he's huge for me. Decalogue is probably one of the greatest things you could ever watch. And I was looking at Decalogue 1 and 5 because of the lens choices, the use of the lens, the kind of lens he uses, and where he puts it in relationship to the actor and the landscape is really good for the psychological spirit of the main character. It really takes you into their space, into their world. So we definitely were looking at that for the back half of the film, especially the second half leading up to the murder. The murder itself, that extended scene in Decalogue 5, a short film about murder, you can never reach that, and that's its own thing. But I wanted the murder to be handheld and pretty close, very intimate between Ballroom and Ashok. But there's one shot which is a medium to long lens wide shot at 96 frames, slow motion with the rain coming. That was very important to me for that sequence because it's very epic in its quality. And I didn't want the murder to just be about Ashok and Ballroom. I wanted it to be about servant and master, and I wanted it to be about the centuries of battle between rich and poor. Not just those two men on that rainy night, but about something grander and deeper than that. And that's what that wide shot in slow motion is about, with that rain, the kind of Kurosawa rain that makes it feel something epic about it.
I know that we were planning to include the audience questions in the last 15 minutes through the chat box, but I've been monitoring them, and so many interesting and important questions and comments are coming in that I will allow myself to intersperse one or two and hold off on my own questions for a moment, because Anu Sharma McGee writes, in my many visits back home to visit family in India, I can tell you that this was a very real depiction of life in India. But her question was, where did you shoot in India? My mom and I were trying to guess in which cities you were.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's really been shot almost entirely in and around Delhi. So Delhi and its suburbs like Faridabad and Gurgaon. Gurgaon is where the rich towers are, and that's actually where the novel takes place, in Delhi and Gurgaon also. It also takes place in Dhanbad, which is a coal mining town that it's run by a lot of mafia. You may have seen it in Gangs of Waysawpur, Anurag's film that had been in Cannes over a decade ago. I went to Dhanbad to do the research, but then later Netflix and others got very upset that I went to Dhanbad because of it's not very safe. And we weren't allowed to film there or go there ever again. So we staged that rich villa in Faridabad. And then Ballroom's home village was shot an hour and a half outside of Agra. Agra is where the Taj Mahal is, which is ultimately about 4.5 hours from Delhi. That's where that village was shot, because that sequence takes place, the movie takes place in 2007. So that stuff's in the 90s. And it was hard to find villages near Delhi that had not been modernized already, because the city keeps growing and enveloping things. So we really had to go way out there for that one.
I have a question based on something personal, because you and I are also colleagues. We teach at Columbia's film program of the School of the Arts. And I often wonder this: how has teaching directing at Columbia informed your work as a director, specifically The White Tiger?
Well, I always find it really helpful, because in trying to explain the craft, not the art, just the craft, to students, you're forced to really go over it yourself and go hone it yourself. And in going over it so many times, you start to digest it more. So that's just on a craft level. I find it incredibly helpful. But then from an artistic point of view, you must have this experience too, that the students they have their own vision, they have their own way of thinking, they have their own mindset, that you're constantly being hit with different ideas and different ways of thinking that you hadn't encountered before. They're also really attuned to new film and television that I'm not as attuned to. I'm more looking at the older movies and movies that, were part of what impacted me the most, things that you might have showed me, or Hamid Dabashi or James Seamus or anyone might have shown me at Columbia, or that I had encountered in those times. So I find it very helpful for those reasons. Really, I don't think of it as teaching. I mean, the craft, maybe you could say, is quote teaching, but beyond that, I find myself just another person in the room that might have a little more experience than them, and maybe I could help show them the road they're trying to go on, not any other road, but their own specific road, whatever that is, that's for their own vision, you know. It's just pushing them to find their own vision.
And actually, these days, as you know, our student body is more international than it has ever been. We have students from every country and ethnicity. Your parents were Iranian immigrants. Does that give you an indirect but personal connection to the white tiger?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I lived in Iran for 3 years, including in a village very similar to the one you see in the movie, because my dad comes from a village like that. He didn't have electricity or running water till he was 6 or 7. He grew up with all kinds of animals, the same as Balram. He would have hugged a donkey instead of a water buffalo. And in fact, when I was growing up in North Carolina, in our childhood, in a suburb, we had a goat and some geese and some ducks and all kinds of weird animals until the neighbors came and said, you cannot have these animals here in the yard. And we had to get rid of them because they said you can't do that. Like, it's against codes of the city to have all these kind of barnyard animals in a suburban yard. So, living in Iran for 3 years in general helped. This kind of thing that Balram does, I know that, I do that. When he tells the mongoose, oh, don't pay me that much, that's way too much money, pay me half. Oh, I know that. That's a word for that in Persian. It's called torof. So I know all those things. And that really helped. My crew was 99% Indian. I brought maybe 3-4 people with me, which is unusual for a movie that is being financed by Netflix in America. Normally people bring everybody with them, but I didn't want to do that. I brought just 3-4 people with me. So my crew was Indian, and that helped with authenticity. And for me, it was an interesting experience because I turned around and everybody looked like me for the first time in my career. That was different and kind of cool.
Yeah. Here's a question that's prompted by Linda, who's asking what motivated you to reveal the car accident at the very start, as opposed to the books waiting to reveal this as a kind of surprise. And I'm just going to extend this into my own question. I mean, you begin in the backseat of a car speeding through late night streets of Delhi in 2007. After a freeze frame, you flash forward to Balram 3 years later as an entrepreneur in Bangalore. And then you flash back to Balram's childhood before returning to the fatefully dramatic night. Does that circular structure suggest inevitability, that the events have to transpire as they do?
Well, in a way, yes. I mean, we can just give spoilers away. We've been talking about all the murder and everything. I mean, the novel is even...
We're assuming, by the way, that everyone here has watched the film, but I may be wrong.
It's okay. The novel, in the end of the first chapter, he says, I cut my master's throat. He says he murdered the guy right up front. And the first draft of the script was like that. And then the idea came, well, what if we didn't do that? What if we waited and didn't reveal the murder, which was very hard for me to even wrap my head around because I had been reading this book for 15 years, And so once I delayed that, then the idea came, what about moving that hit and run up front, mainly to energize the opening, to start it in a very fast way. And it ended up having an interesting after effect that I didn't even fully understand until I started screening the movie in rough cuts, which was because of the wanted poster. Although you don't know what he's wanted for a while, you only find out he's wanted for murder in the middle of the movie. Most people I came to understand, or a lot of people, thought he was wanted for murder for running over that kid. And then they, little by little, started to realize maybe it's something else. And then they started to realize, oh, it's going to be the guy, the master maybe. And that, I didn't fully even understand how that would work until the edit stage when people told me that was their feeling, because I know the book and the story so well. And it just seemed to work. I wanted to start on the shots of the Dandi March, Gandhi, the Gandhi statue, which is featured in the book a few times. Do you remember Clockwork Orange?
Oh, yeah.
You remember the shots of the Christ? There were 3 Christs, and he shot them in all these close-ups.
Yeah.
That statue come from there. The shooting of that. Yeah.
We have a question from Tomas. Sorry, I'm just, I'll find it in a second, but it's based on something I wanted to ask as well, because the Criterion Collection published your 10 favorite films, which included not only Antonioni, Bergman, Satyajit Ray, but also Agnes Varda and the Decalogue. But it was, I think, Thomas who was asking about whether the Apu trilogy of Satyajit Ray has been an inspiration. I actually felt Pather Panchali, but you tell us.
Yeah, I mean, well, that Criterion thing is always so tricky because you could change the top 10 every day. It's just, and you don't know how to pin it down to 10. But yeah, Ray, the introduction to Ray was at Columbia. Scorsese restored and re-released 9 Ray movies. You may remember that. And they showed them at the late, great Dan Talbot's cinema at the Lincoln Plaza. Yeah. And so Arvind and I, and sometimes a couple of other of our Indian friends like Pradeep, would get a train and go down to the Lincoln Plaza, watch the Ray movie, and then walk back to 116th Street talking about it. And this was like a joy. Every 2 weeks we could do that until we had seen those 9 movies. And that left a huge mark on me. And it connected to the other kind of cinema that I was becoming interested in, like Kiarostami and Rossellini, the War trilogy, and then later Ken Loach became really very interesting for me. His work with Paul Laverty, and yeah, Ray was always very important.
And Jonathan in the chat is asking, in the past, you've expressed your admiration for Iranian cinema and said that it has had an influence on your work. Can you expound on that? Are there Iranian filmmakers that have been particularly influential? And are there specific moments in your movies where the influence of Iranian cinema is particularly present?
Yeah, I mean, Kiarostami is certainly at the top of the list. I remember just seeing Where's the Friend's House. I was just so astounded by it. And then later, all of them close up. And Amir Naderi is someone that was very important to me. His film The Runner, and then he and I worked together on a few films, which was kind of amazing to be able to have a chance to work with someone that you admired. Makhmalbaf's films, there's a handful of those that I think are really amazing. A Moment of Innocence, or AKA Bread and the Flower Pot, which is the original title in Persian. Nuna Goldun, it's really good. You've seen it, I'm sure, that one.
With Mohsen Makhmalbaf, I'm remembering Kandahar.
Yeah.
And I'm also, bizarrely enough, now I'm remembering more his daughter Samira Makhmalbaf's films than the father.
Oh no, his film, well, Shalom Cinema is amazing, but my favorite of his films is Moment of Innocence. The Persian title is Bread and Flower Pot. It's so good. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you have been called, based on your earlier films, contemporary American cinema's foremost neo-realist. And we haven't really touched on that yet. How much has Italian neo-realism been a shaping inspiration for you?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, this film was different, but on all the other ones, it was pretty important. The weirdly, Goodbye Solo might answer both these questions, because I remember watching Flowers of St. Francis, and Rossellini had said that after the War trilogy, he thought, meaning Rome, Open City, Paisan, and Germany Year Zero. Germany Year Zero being maybe one of the only war films that is actually about not going to war, as opposed to encouraging people to go to war, despite the filmmaker's intention. He made Flowers of St. Francis. And he said it was because after those films, he thought the world needed something else, some other spirit or energy that might get them out of that dark moment. And at that time, when I was watching those films and thinking about that comment, it was a time of the 9/11 and the Iraq War and the bombings in Afghanistan and all that killing. And I remember thinking, what would be a contemporary response to that? Because all these war movies were coming out that I didn't want to watch. And not because they were good or not good, I just didn't want to watch more war. I was seeing all this war on television every day. And then that Rossellini thing came to mind, and that's what led to Goodbye Solo, which is also some weird response to Kiarostami's Taste of Cherry, just flipped in a different direction. So somehow that film was a combination of both of those things.
I have such beautiful memories of Goodbye Solo, this quietly affecting character study with such a sense of authenticity throughout. And I did keep in my notes A.O. Scott's review in the New York Times. I mean, he's been following your work very carefully. I want to quote this because I think he's so right. Grace is also what defines Mr. Bahrani's filmmaking. I can't think of anything else to call the quality of exquisite attention, wry humor, and wide awake intelligence that informs every frame of this almost perfect film, unquote.
Mm.
And by the way, I have to elaborate on what you just said earlier. It's not just that Criterion next week is releasing your first two features, Man Pushcart and Chop Shop, but three of your shorts.
Oh, yeah.
So people who have not yet had the opportunity can see Plastic Bag from 2009, which has the voice of Werner Herzog throughout, Lift You Up from 2014, and Blood Kin from 2018. So great that this moment is all coming together.
Plastic Bag is my favorite of all my films.
Your above and beyond the features?
I think so, yeah.
Ay, caramba.
18 minutes. You can watch it on Criterion or on YouTube or whatever. Yeah, I like that one.
Okay. Now, one other question. The brisk pace that you set at the very beginning of The White Tiger, it breathlessly takes us through the nocturnal streets of Delhi. It takes us through various time frames. Well, you edited the film too with Tim Strito, and you edited during the pandemic. I'm curious what the process was like, and since you do tend to shape your films, how did it work with Tim Strito?
It was so weird, the COVID of it all. Yeah, Tim was great. I've edited 4 of the films of my films alone, and then 3 of them with an editor. And he assembled the film while I was shooting, and then which was awesome. And he contributed a lot to the film. You know, for 3 months we were editing together. Well, not together, but in the same place. When I came back from India, I moved the editing room from the lab in Manhattan to an empty a 4-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn near where I lived so that I could walk there. And Tim and the assistant editors and everybody by chance working on the film lived in Brooklyn. So nobody minded that we were in Brooklyn now. And for 3 months we were in the same place, and Tim was editing in one room and I would edit in another. And the movie gets broken into 5 reels, like back in the old days when there were reels. You still break it up. And he would work on one reel and I would work on a different one. And then we would trade back and forth, and we would have meetings and walk into each other's rooms, take a look at this scene. Could you look at that? And then COVID happened. And on March 14th, everybody left. And I would go to this empty 4-bedroom apartment by myself. And Tim and the assistant editors were remote. They were all editing remotely. And we would just share things digitally. Honestly, sometimes I would film my screen with WhatsApp, and I would send 2 or 3 versions of the same scene to Tim or to my partner in Paris, Azimi, who's been on all my films since Chop Shop. She was a producer on this one and has co-written a lot of my films. And they would get endless WhatsApp messages from me of scenes. And it was the only film I edited that I couldn't bring people in to the edit room and watch the movie, watch them watch the movie, which is so important when you're editing because you become numb to stuff and you want to feel the energy of the person in front of you. And I couldn't do that. I could just send links to people and they would call me days later. So I've actually never seen this movie with an audience. I just took my best guess, really.
And I was pleasantly surprised to see that Ava DuVernay is one of the executive producers. I was curious how she got involved, and was her input more early on or at the end when you were editing?
She came into the end. Ava and I know each other, I think actually through Roger Ebert. He had been a fan of my early films and had been a fan of hers. And we both appear in this documentary about him. And I'm not on social media, but Ava's, of course, very active and social. And she had been I think, tweeting about my films since Goodbye Solo until now, like encouraging people to see them, and had done a Q&A with me for 99 Homes. And um, when she saw a cut of The White Tiger in the edit, we started talking, and she had some really good notes. And there was a conversation about could she be involved in this, and she really wanted to do it, and we thought it would be great to have her. And so she got involved in post, looking at cuts, and then really helping with navigating Netflix and the marketing of the film, which she had done with them a few times. And her original career was as a publicist, so she's got an incredibly smart sense of how that works, and that was awesome to watch her talk about that. And she's just a lover of movies and a lover of getting people's films out there, and so it's just great to partner with her on that.
Yeah, she's an extraordinary cinephile. I had
Yeah.
such pleasure when she was co-hosting Turner Classic Movies, The Essentials, a year ago. Even films that I had seen 20 times or that I didn't have any intention to watch, listening to her introducing them, I had to stay. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
she's amazing.
Oh, she's a powerhouse. Yeah.
Susan Adler asked about the possible influence of The Great Gatsby.
Yeah, of course, I love Gatsby. I know it's a huge thing for Arvind. He talks about it a lot. Yeah, there's no doubt that it's there. It's present. Even other things, Taxi Driver, I always assumed was present in the novel.
Okay. And Linda's question, where can we watch his shorts as well as other films? As of next week, the Criterion Collection, and I believe the Criterion Channel, to the best of my knowledge. Is that correct, Ramin?
Yeah, the shorts are on the Criterion Channel right now. Plastic Bag, I think you can even find on YouTube somewhere. And Manfred Card and Chop Shop you can get on Criterion Channel, or the discs will be available next week. All the other ones I think you can get in various places, Amazon or here and there, iTunes or whatever. Goodbye Solo and 99 Homes and stuff.
Now, a few people, this is variations on a theme. A few people asked about, all right, Jerry Holtz, the movie dealt with relationships in India and there were no, quote, white people involved. Why did the main character, Balram, make such a point that the white man's time on top was soon to be over? And then it was pointed out that twice, sorry, I have so many chat things that I'm scrolling down all the time. He says that twice when writing and speaking to the Chinese ambassador.
Well, he's really talking to the head of China. He's talking to the premier, Wen Jiabao, who was the head of China at that time. There's a little bit more in the novel about it. And we shot these scenes actually in that, and I threw them away. But in the novel, Ashok sees a prostitute, a sex worker, and then Balram saves up a lot of money to go see one as well, who would be a white-skinned woman with blonde hair. We shot the scenes, but I threw them out. They didn't quite work, and the movie was getting way too long. I mean, the movie could have gone on forever. But yeah, in 2008, when the novel was written in 2006, in that time period, India and China were really on the rise economically, and the West's decline had begun, and I guess still continues. And so there was a real confidence at that time in India as a country, which is not as confident right now. The numbers kind of stalled at a certain point. China kept going up. But yeah, I think China and India were confident economically and as people, and the Western world, let's say predominantly white Western world, was starting to lose that confidence. And I think the novel is somehow sarcastically talking about that through the perspective of this character, who in the novel has more about it. He starts to become sarcastic about things like skin whitening creams that were prevalent in India and things like that. There's so many more funny things in it, but I don't know, it seemed to be again, some kind of a prescient thing in the novel told in some tongue-in-cheek way.
Okay. Nancy Lazar wrote, I've been to India on business, and The White Tiger accurately depicts the dichotomy of India, the haves and the desperate. We would have dinner at a Maharaja's palace and walk out to the street to get into cars with drivers, almost stepping over people sleeping on the streets. It was extremely disturbing. And then another comment sort of extends the vision of your film into other cultures as well. Mario Henriquez wrote that in El Salvador, There's no racial discrimination. It's not racial, but social. No, wait. Social discrimination. Your movie is similar to what happens in Salvadoran society. The lower class is born to serve the upper class. Your movie is universal.
I'm so happy to hear that, not because I'm happy with that situation, but that he felt that it was also specific to what he knew, because I've gotten a lot of messages like that. I got a message from someone that I'm working with on this documentary I'm doing who's from Mexico. He's like, I saw the movie and I come from a poor background in Mexico, and I don't know how you understood all that, because that seems so true to what I grew up in. And I had a friend who watched it. She's from someone that I work with. She's from Zimbabwe, and she watched it with her whole family who's from Zimbabwe. They live in LA now. And she kept telling me that her mom kept saying, this is just like Zimbabwe the whole time. And I've gotten a lot of emails or text messages like that from people in different countries. It seems to be connecting. I mean, it was, the movie was the number one movie for weeks in like 64 countries, and has been seen by like almost 30 million people on Netflix. It's just been, the number of people who've watched it is kind of hard for me to grasp as an independent filmmaker. But it seems to be striking a chord, I guess.
Yeah. I remember when I was a grad student, one of the most profound things I learned, this was when I studied with Harold Bloom at Yale.
Oh my God.
It was from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote a long time ago that the more an artist delves into what is most unique and personal, the more universal it becomes. So it's the very specificity of how you depict each of these cultures, including the white tiger, that renders them universal ultimately, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I thought about Goodfellas a lot, because Goodfellas has a similar kind of story in a way. Like, it has voiceover, it has a childhood, it has the main part of his adult life, it has a part at the end, and it's taking you into a world and a culture that most people don't know, and it goes into the details of it as well, you know. And I thought a lot about that in terms of details and shots and showing and saying. I think this idea that voiceover can't say what we see is totally wrong. Why not? Of course it could. It did in Kind Hearts and Coronets. It does in Fight Club. It does in in Goodfellas. They're like, gotta cut the garlic really thin, and you see a close up of them cutting the garlic with a razor blade really thin, and seeing it and hearing it is great. You know.
As some of my students know, I'm leery about voiceover narration because too often I find it redundant. But last week's class that I did at Columbia was all about voiceover narration. And I showed Mudbound, which has six voiceover narrations. And I thought that was great. So it depends. I think that there just needs to be some kind of contrapuntal relationship, even if it's merely in the tone of the voice and the quality of the image, but it can't be identical.
Yeah.
An interesting question from Sue Fern, because actually in last week's class, I did invoke this very book, Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. And Sue is asking, do you think that the subject that you are dealing with is more relevant due to the book Caste? I'm not sure that you've read or heard about Isabel Wilkerson's book.
Maybe maybe for an American audience who has read that book, I just think it's relevant because of economic situation, and that it's gotten only worse since Aravind wrote the novel. You know, and I mean, the novel came out right when like 2008, talking about the financial crisis that shattered the world. So I don't know. I guess Jeff Bezos has a driver, right?
Can you, we don't have much time left, but can you talk about how you collaborated with your cinematographer, Paolo Carnera? I imagine this was shot digitally.
Yeah, Paolo was one of the very few people I brought. I really liked his work in this Italian TV series called Gomorrah. And he's a veteran. Like, he shot, 50, 60 features. If you can believe it, Annette, his first job in the camera department, not as a cinematographer, but in the camera department when he just got out of college, was on a Fellini set. And Fellini told him to like move a light one time, and he's like, oh my God, Fellini. So he's amazing. And we talked about different worlds and different looks. Like, what would the village look like compared to other locations. So, like the village is handheld. It's got a 16 millimeter grain on it. Even if there's a dolly move, it's handheld on a dolly. The villa, the Donbot villa, is mainly Steadicam and dolly on a wide lens, so that we can see the actor in a big, wide, rich, clean place now. It's totally new and different. We talked about the lighting of the design of the rich apartment upstairs and the downstairs. Like for the downstairs, we were looking at Chris Doyle's work in Fallen Angels, and the kind of lights he was using in that film, the neons and the kind of the piss yellow and the weird kind of magenta stuff that kind of looks beautiful and ugly at the same time. And then in Bangalore, when he's a master, which frames the movie, and we cut to it here and there, I really wanted a lot of Steadicam movement and dolly movement. It was a lot of movement that was about the confidence of the character, that he's made it, he's on top now, and he's got a lot of energy and a lot of confidence in him, and the camera should reflect that and should pull us around with him as he sells us his version of the story. Whether you want to believe all the things he said is up to you, but he wants you to believe in him and believe what he's saying. He's selling you, and that a lot of that camera movement was about that.
And I must say that even watching the visuals and the entire film on my television set, because it's a Netflix film, I felt like I was getting a very full aesthetic as well as human experience. And the kind of global storytelling that the White Tiger represents, with, Priyanka referred to it as cross-pollination of cultures. Streaming is something that many filmmakers and film educators have been nervous about, but Netflix gave you the opportunity to do something truly worthy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and also, if it hadn't been for COVID, our intention was to take the film to Venice and Toronto if they had liked it, which later Alberto and Cameron told me they had loved it. But because of COVID, Netflix wasn't going to participate last year. I'm sure they're going to participate again when everything clears up. And they released it theatrically all over America and in other countries, Australia, New Zealand, but not in New York where we live, or Los Angeles. But they did do it theatrical. They had been committed to that from the beginning. So I would have had that kind of best of both worlds, where you could have experienced it in a theater if you lived near one and you wanted to, which I would have wanted to, and I still have not done. But I get this thing where on one day it's available to 200 million people in 190 countries, already subtitled in like 35 languages. And as I said, suddenly it was #1 for a week in Netflix around the world, and 30 million people have seen it. It's just kind of nuts. Like, that's a huge amount of people.
That's mind-boggling. That's more than you would ever have gotten, even if your film had been released by a major studio in 2,000 theaters in a given week.
Yeah, it's already more than like a hit like Slumdog. It's already passed all that. And I mean, they just announced the numbers on Friday, which is one of the very kind of rare times that Netflix is announcing the numbers, because it's just somehow hit globally in ways that I honestly never expected.
Well, you deserve all the wonderful attention and acclaim that you've been receiving. We are at the end of our time. I'm sorry that I didn't get to all of the chat questions and comments, but I think I speak on behalf of the few hundred people here who thank you, congratulate you, and wish you all the best as The White Tiger continues to reach audiences around the world.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to thank your audience for coming, but to thank you most of all, because I learned so much of movie making from you, and it's always in my head. So I really appreciate it. And it's great to see you. And thanks for everything you did for me.
What can I say? I'm blushing. Thank you, Ramin. Good night to all of you. Stay well.
Bye-bye.